Hello everybody and welcome back to another Future of the Fortress. If you're unfamiliar, these are a monthly Q&A that Tarn Adams does on the Bave 12 forums. Normally I try to get these completed in the first 12 days of the month, but this time I've been very late, and there's an excuse for that. I briefly got bit by the Prime Day bug, and then realizing that I would actually have to buy things from Amazon in order to fulfill the needs that I suddenly realized that I had upon seeing all of the deals. And after a little bit of searching, I then realized that the Memory Express, which is local to me, matches all of the Prime Day deals, and in some cases it even beats them. So I've been upgrading my storage setup, building a NAS, and trying to sort out a better way of storing all of the footage that I record every stream. For reference, it's about 30 gigabytes of footage. So I've been kind of cooked up on that, working on that over my weekends instead of editing videos. And for that I apologize, but hopefully it'll help my storage solutions in the future and improve my workflow going forward. I'll probably have a video covering that at some point soon. But for now, let's focus on the Future of the Fortress, Tarn's monthly Q&A, covering Dwarf Fortress. Because it is currently the 19th, and these responses were posted on the 2nd, some of them have already been made moot, so I've left a couple out. I also would like to note that because I interviewed Tarn on my Twitch channel, and the VOD is now available on this YouTube channel, some of this information has also been covered there in our discussions. But without further ado, let's dive into the Bave 12 Games report for July 2nd, 2025. Toady writes, "We got the ranged weapon update up in June, which was cheerful. This month, we'll split time between Siege stuff and another more routine update. On the Siege side, I'm in the middle of digging and dwarf walling and building changes and such. We have lots of new graphics for broken things. 13,000 sales in June due to some healthy bumps." And on to the questions from the Future of the Fortress. A Curious Cat writes, "With respect to walls being destroyed and needing to be filled in, and metal reinforced walls, is there any possibility that we might get cement or concrete?" And Tarn's response is, "Yeah, we're considering it if we have time to fit it in. The fast way is just to add a strong metal bar items to the existing constructions, but wouldn't be as good." The next question comes in from Eric Blank, and they say, "With the siege improvements, will we be seeing mercenaries hitting the field as well as working both for and against us? I know it was a long-term goal to get the ability to hire mercenary companies, and they're involved in world gen battles. Could we also see goblin sieges attempt to infiltrate through the caverns and dig their way in if necessary too, since they do not have access to them?" And Tarn's response is, "Mercenary appearance in fort mode is in the army list, so it's cropped up here in the stretch siege list. And even if it doesn't show up in the first time round, it's now in the permanent nearer soup of things. Cavern goblins as well. The tricky bit there is any potential underground map rewrite stuff changing how it works, since the armies already have to transit on the world map." And a question from Brewer Bob. I wonder if there's any relation to Bob the Builder. Anyways, "With construction destroying coming, will we see burning constructions? As an example, dragons setting wooden walls on fire?" And Tarn's response is, "It's on the list. I assume there will be a number of horrifying problems with it related to magma, but we'll see what happens." A bit of a longer question from Volleylol, and they say, "Just watched a video on mummification, and realized that Dwarf Fortress has mummies, but no way of making them. With the Myths and Magic arc, or the Embark Scenarios arc, or the former mummies in Dwarf Fortress and in real life, both are highly connected to magic and rituals, and they need some supernatural explanation of their origin, as they exist in the game. The latter because building site for a great tomb makes great sense as an Embark scenario." And Tarn's response is, "It's a human thing currently, but I imagine all of that will get shaken up at some point. I have no idea when though. It's not a high priority compared to a bunch of other magical things." A question from RH Metal 88, and they say, "Will we ever get a rebalanced glass making? Green glass is functionally infinite, as long as you have fuel, so it's kind of really good as a trade good. But crystal glass is only as good as silver, even though rock crystals are as rare as gold." And Tarn's response is, "We're looking at soils at some point during the digging and replacement part of the siege stuff. If changes occur there, glass and sand collection will be affected, at least." A question from Yal on a similar subject, and they say, "For this Future of the Fortress, it would be fun to read about how you decided on certain soil displacement challenges you were talking about in June's Future of the Fortress. It's interesting from a development perspective, as for the most part, for every problem in Dwarf Fortress, there's ability to fix it. Example, miasma problem, throw the dead bodies in the lava. With soil displacement, players love their lawns, and I'm sure would love the option for dirt and grass blocks. But it got me thinking, will we be seeing more additions around the post-siege cleanup phase with the new siege updates? And Tarn's response is, I was working on the things that were released recently, so no additional decisions have been made. I don't know if there will be cleanup changes, and the main one seems like it would be something like having items stay with bodies. But there have always been a number of complications with that, and things get messy, so I don't even know how much it would really help. And then y'all asks, will diggers be siege engines, NPCs, or both? And Tarn's response is to that quick question, NPCs and battering rams are at the top for terrain altering generally. We have some other things written down, but I doubt they'll make it first. Another question from Maze Now, and they say, currently, monster hunters and beast slayers that ask for residency never ask to become citizens. Is this ever going to change? They are currently the only visitor type that I'm aware of that permanently stays in the long-term resident mode without manual intervention by the player, sending them to a holding and removing the monster hunter labor, etc. And Tarn's response is, it's up for consideration in the notes. Yeah, their weird wanna-die behavior is at odds with how they work in World Gen. And a question comes in from Frankville, and they say, as you mentioned, arcs no longer exist, and now development progress will be done step by step, instead of stretching out over a year or two, in pursuit of a huge major update. Does this new approach still include the core arcs? Has the criteria for determining the percentage of progress in the next release changed? If arcs are no longer a target for the final release, what new approach do you propose to get to version 1.0? And Tarn's response is, I still have that point system lying around. This wasn't rooted in arcs, but just a long list of items with point scores, measured in 1/28,000ths of 1.0. That moved the number upward slowly. It hasn't really become much less relevant, since the things that get us to 1.0, aka 100, are still pretty in line with what we've been doing. But I'm trying to remain flexible, and this includes that if this system becomes a problem. And a follow-up from Frankville, and they say, do you think it will be possible to maintain this new pace forever? I imagine there will be aspects that would require considerable rewrites of the current code. And Tarn's response is, it already became a problem when I got sick, and it's proved impossible to keep up with 2-week cycles. I'm not sure what that'll mean. Routine releases and work on larger releases, and considerable rewrites are happening on branches, and I'm keeping the branches updated as the regular routine releases happen. That all seems to work. It's just finding the time to keep all of this happening at a pace that is vaguely satisfying for people, which is probably not possible. DPH Kraken asks, how valuable are the community resources for modding to you, particularly with Lua? That's a big system that you've delegated out, and I've been contracted to write tutorials for. And Tarn's response is, they are good for the community, and I imagine they'll also be good for me too, since I haven't had much of a chance to engage with the Lua, and I'm going to have to start altering it directly once it gets mainlined. DPH Kraken also asks, you've mentioned Fortress and Adventure audio parity. Will the audio changes be tested on the experimental branch? And Tarn's response is, I'm not sure where we'll roll them out, but we'll need to be careful about it. And a question from Stained Class, and they say, melee soldier squads tend to brainlessly charge enemies once they see them. Is it planned to add the ability for squads to guard a position without leaving it at all? As an example, selecting a zone the squad must protect and stay in, or even have infantry formations set in the squad menu to guard bottlenecks. And Tarn's response is, we had been planning on doing squad formations for a long time, and didn't get to it tragically once, like a decade ago, as with the ranged dwarves. I think we'll see some changes for your melee soldiers as well as we go. And a question from Vanzetti, and they say, how dynamic are Adventure Mode NPCs planned to be? Will they have the ranged behaviors that Fortress Mode creatures can have? And Tarn's response is, we're hoping for that, yeah, whenever we get back around to it. I don't know where it's going to start since they don't have a lot to do outside of the ones with villainous activities. If they do anything interesting with resources, as in Fort Mode, then resources, aka the economy, needs to be handled in some way, even if it's back to infinite refilling barrels or whatever. Which is the sort of thing I was trying to get away from with all of the World Gen resource pile changes. Another question from Vanzetti, and they say, will you address the issue of the extremely populated sites being unplayable in Adventure Mode? And Tarn's response is, our latest attempt to address this was all of the fort mode optimizations, which made the 10,000 population goblin sites walkable for me, last I checked. If it's still an issue, then the optimizations might not be enough, and we'll have to sparsen things out, which is variously nightmarish depending on how it's done. Another question from Stained Class, and they say, many animals that are actually different subspecies of the same species are present in the game, but these are treated as completely different species, thus unable to interbreed. I mostly think about dogs, wolves, dingoes, boars, pigs also come to mind. May this change in the future? And Tarn's response is, there are things like mules too, which don't come from horses and donkeys properly, but somehow just spring into existence. I have no idea when this will be next addressed. Another question from Stained Class, and they say, the Meanderer tag may be nice to see normal animals stroll around, but it's a serious handicap for hunting and war-trained animals, and animal people joining civilizations, as it will slow down to a crawl. May this Meanderer tag be reworked so it doesn't apply to hunting and war-trained animals, and animal people in a civ. Similarly, creatures that have the Ben-IGN, B-E-N-I-G-N, I don't know what that means or what it does, so please address that in the comments, tag while they clearly shouldn't flee from humans, like elephants, or be aggressive if you get too close, like boars, or particularly hippos. Is it planned to remove the B-E-N-I-G-N tag to appropriate creatures? Or if this tag was added to most creatures for difficulty balancing purposes, will an option allowing to choose between keeping it or removing it for filtering creatures for realism be added? And Tarn's response is, these are reasonable suggestions as well. Generally, animal behavior should be a lot more complicated than a few tags, but I'm not sure when we'll get around to it. A question from Major Third, and they say, will there be any controls added for naming and renaming civilizations and gods and religions, etc. during world generation? It sucks to load a fantastical world and only get terrible dwarven civilization names, like the Awning of Lutes, and I want more traditional names like Stonehelm or Rockbeard Clan. Allowing us to edit a world before starting it can't be too crazy, can it? Sorry for the ignorant coding question. So this is me talking. I'm just gonna butt in here for a second. I really like the silly dwarven faction names. There's something about it that's funny. They're not called the translation. The translation is just some feeble thing for our smooth human brains. We don't understand the full context for the words. The dwarven names are the dwarven translations, so it's much more fitting within the world. For me, Stonehelm just sounds like something in Britain. Let's read Tarn's response and see what he has to say. The names generally suck, but lots of things need names, so it's a bit harder to solve than doing the traditional sorts of names. Fixing that is in a slow pipeline. I'm not sure about editing worlds that have been made. It's not a priority since it can already be done outside of the game, using DF hack, but it's reasonable enough. Then there's the prefab side of the myth and magic stuff, where pre-named things could be introduced into worlds. It keeps track of family groups, but they aren't used for naming purposes currently. This falls under general name reworking that we want to happen at some point, but requires updating the language system. And a question comes in from Beeg, and they say, when Adventurers Building Sites is added back to Adventure Mode, how will it differ from the previous implementation? If I recall correctly, it was left out of the Steam release so it could be improved. Will the human civilization sites eventually generate with workshops in them where it can make sense for workshops to be? And if so, will player adventurers be allowed to craft at them? And Tarn's response is, it was left out of the Steam release because we wanted to get something posted. All the same, we're hoping to do some improvements related to crafting, like getting all the workshop jobs up. We originally wanted to do something different with the workshop and adventure mode jobs, but it makes more sense now to just get it in line with fort mode first. And a question from Stained Class, who's becoming today's main character, and they say, speaking about humanoid angels conquering a vault in fort mode, and retiring the fort makes them playable in adventure mode. Do you see this as a bug or as a feature? And Tarn's response is, yeah, this is an accidental feature. It makes little sense, but it isn't urgent to fix it. Once we have something better, I can think about fixing it. A big long one from Dick Butt to Great, everybody's favorite username, and they say, why are trolls the only creature in the game which have hair labeled as fur? Which features a corresponding yarn token, which enables it to be made into cloth items labeled as fur. This restriction forces a certain brand of flavoring to the vanilla experience, which is interesting. But I'm curious about why the trafficking of furs was prohibited by default, as this limitation removes any procedural variance for yarn fur products. I can imagine a number of reasons, but if you tell me it was due to moral or ethical consideration made during development, I'm not sure I'll believe you on that. I've played this game, Toady, and glances over at the artifact Capbone floodgates, and various dead bodies and naked goblin minstrels attacking the locals, and various blood and vomit encrusted cups and dinner tables. Actually, on a second thought, maybe I could see that. And Tarn quotes Putnam's response, so I'll read hers first, and she says, "Trafficking of furs generally refers to, entire skins. It's an entire industry the game is missing. Not any particular statement. I think troll yarn is more like shearing a sheep than a fur coat. I didn't consult Toady for this, but you can use rhinoceros horns for decoration, which seems worse on that front to me. It's a matter of just not having furry creatures, leather have fur still attached." And Tarn's response is, "Yeah, Putnam's correct about this. We just haven't gotten to fur at all. And I didn't want to call it a troll wool, even if that would be more appropriate." And I'm not sure if this username that's next in the list is Tavois or Tavuz or Tavuvuz, I don't know. Anyway, they ask, is it possible for a civilization to learn to tame new species of animals based on the animals one has managed to tame in one's own stronghold? I like the idea that my actions can influence this possibility, perhaps even through book research or a similar system. I would also like to know if it's possible to learn how to craft new clothing or armor. And Tarn's response is, the level of training gets sent to future fortresses, but the final domestication stage, however, never happens, where they become used everywhere. I don't remember what complications there were with adding a new pet to the domestication list, but that's possibly what it was. There isn't any learning of new things, really, aside from the ones that hardly do anything at all, just the scholar stuff. Unifying these systems is a hope for the future. And another question from Stained Class, and they say, the new mouse-driven interface is nice, but with some things like selecting a specific type of bed before construction, seems impossible with keyboard only. Is it planned to make the game fully playable with keyboard only, although with different controls than the premium version? And will mouse clicks be macroable in some way? And Tarn's response is, we're planning to fully widgetify the menus at some point, so the keyboard will work with everything. Question comes in from Topples, and they say, in the entity raws, can one specify the rarity that an entity member appears with a given piece of armor tag? This currently can't be done for weapons and shields, so are there any plans to add rarity to an entity's weaponry and shields? Would it be difficult to add? And Tarn's response is, I don't think it would be difficult, but there wasn't a place for it in vanilla, since pretty much everything needed to be available to the vanilla factions to round things out. And a very long one from a Spatula 66, and they say, currently, the malevolent personality alternatives applied to goblins are on the creature level, not on the civilization level. Is this intended to be changed in the future, making this more of a feature of goblin civs rather than a feature of the goblin species? I feel like I heard somewhere that this was the case, but I'm unsure. There could be some kind of entity token that alters the personalities of creatures born as part of that entity. I just think it is a bit weird and annoying to have goblins as a species be pretty much incapable of being peaceful, altruistic and moderate, etc., and even when they are born in other civs, and have good values and ethics. And their naturally high violence and anger facets make them start a lot of brawls in town markets, which is definitely an issue. Goblins also often make up a large portion of the population of most human and dwarven and elven civilizations in most worlds, largely because of the fact that food is not needed to sustain a population of goblins. So it would be nice if these goblins would act a bit more normal. Sorry, but goblin anger issues are just really funny to me. And Tarn's response is, no, the intention was that goblins don't have any altruistic feelings of any kind. I don't know if that remains interesting as a thing, but we have humans to be human, and so we wanted goblins and elves to be different. We could just have humans for everything if it's all societal. And a question from Egan BW, and they say, whatever happened to that old threat of implementing procedurally generated love poetry? Is that still on the table in the post-Steam era? I feel this project is more important than ever in the era of LLMs to show the world that terrible computer-generated literature can be created using more efficient methods. And Tarn's response is, we haven't gotten to the romance stuff. It's all still on the table though. As you say, the standards for proc-gen text have changed. And a question from Infini, and they say, in the current version, using the same exact seeds and world gen parameters results in generating worlds that have different histories, and the wiki confirms it. It's preventing players from engaging from sharing their worlds via simple worldgen.txt files. Is this bug being worked on? Does using the same seed and worldgen parameters, but different Steam game versions, result in different worlds being generated? What about using simple mods that don't mess with world gen races and generating worlds with a different mod versions enabled? Does it result in generating different worlds? And Tarn's response is, different versions will generally make different worlds, but that's never going to be fixed. Features are added and history can't be kept on the same track. Mods that affect anything about the world will also cause this, but it is a bug when it's the same version. These are generally very time-consuming and annoying to fix, since the root cause can bubble up through several stages, but it should be looked at. And that brings us to the end of the future of the Fortress. All in all, I think this was a good one, with the exception of Tarn being forced to talk shit about his own game. I just don't like seeing Tarn having to say his game sucks for one reason or another. I feel like that is how you get worse changes in the future. I don't think the system necessarily sucks when it comes to language in Dwarf Fortress. I think it's limited, and I think that there's a difference there. And I really wish that Tarn didn't feel the need to respond that way. All that being said, I think the game is in a very good spot right now, and I think that the relatively consistent routine patches are quite phenomenal, to say the least, even though there's been a break due to Tarn getting sick, and I don't think he should feel the need to beat himself up over that. Regardless though, if you're watching this video, I just wanted to say thank you for continuing to watch these. I really enjoy doing these, and I like covering Dwarf Fortress, and if you enjoy the game itself as well, I hope that you stick around, because I'll have another one for you shortly, next month, because of how late this one is. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you sooner than you might think.